Hey guys, we're ready for the next 2 chapters of Flying Solo. 7:19 a.m. Mrs. Muchmore. Wendy Muchmore woke with a throbbing headache. Every bone in her body ached. Every joint was on fire. She wanted to go back to sleep, but she couldn't. Today she was subbing in Mr. Fabiano's 6th grade class at the Paulson Elementary School. She had to be there by 8:12 a.m. sharp. She tried to sit up, but lifting her head brought on such a fit of dizziness she felt like throwing up. She groaned. There was no choice but to call in and take a sick day. They would have to find a substitute for the substitute. With some effort, she lifted the heavy phone book and found the number of the school. Paulson Elementary School. Yes, good morning. This is Mrs. Muchmore. Her voice sounded shaky. I'm scheduled to substitute for Mr. Fabiano today, 6th grade. Unfortunately, I'm sick today, so I can't come in. You're supposed to call the registry when you're sick. It was Mrs. Pierce, the school secretary, and she sounded annoyed. That's district policy. Didn't they tell you that? Yes. Well, I forgot. I'll make a note of it, Mrs. Pierce said. But next time, please phone the registry. She hung up. Wendy sighed and put down the phone. 7:56 a.m. The principal's office. Erwin Peacock sat in his office listening to Peggy Ransom. He had the door closed and a rubber band wrapped tight around his thumbs. Peggy was the mother of a student, Christopher, in Mr. Fabiano's 6th grade class. More important, she was president of the PTA. I'll tell you this, a lot of parents in this district are concerned about that 6th grade team of yours, Mrs. Ransom said, deeply concerned. Pat Kiefer is one teacher who never should have been hired. Sally Walker is in that class and her mother is a close friend of mine, and according to her, Pat Kiefer does not teach. Every day after school she asks Sally, "What did you learn today?" And Sally just stares at her. Learned? Huh? Mr. Peacock leaned forward and rubbed his temples. As a principal, he listened to lots of difficult parents, but there was nobody worse than Peggy Ransom. He dreaded his weekly chats with this woman with her Jaguar, her $500 leather jackets, the rings that sported enormous diamonds on both hands. He closed his eyes. 98% of the parents in the district were wonderful, but the other 2% made him wish he worked as a farmer or a forest ranger. Dana Friedman is supposed to be your superstar, but she's gone to conferences half the time, Mrs. Ransom was saying. I mean, what good is she if she's always out of the classroom? Myrna Riley has her kids brainwashed into following every liberal cause she can get her hands on. And then you've got that cutie pie, Sal Fabiano. There's something very strange going on in that class. As far as I can see, he doesn't do any skill work at all. Kids like him, sure, because he doesn't make them work. What's not to like? From what my son tells me, all the kids do is read and write. Whatever happened to teaching spelling or grammar? Erwin Peacock tried to make it look as if he were listening hard. The woman's voice was about as pleasant as a chainsaw. He could feel it cutting into him. Okay, Peggy, I hear you, Mr. Peacock said, breaking the rubber band wrapped around his thumbs. But my hands are tied. There's no way I can make any changes in that 6th grade team, especially not now at the end of the year. You must. I think it's disgraceful, Peggy Ransom said. Storming out of his office, she swept past Mrs. Pierce's desk and knocked a stack of phone messages onto the floor. One of the phone messages fell against the radiator, where it got caught, out of sight. I've got a good mind to pull my son out of this place and put him into a decent private school, Peggy said loudly, where teachers understand the 3 R's and aren't afraid to teach them. Mr. Peacock called after her. I hope you don't, but you do have that right. And thinking, I should only be so lucky. One of the things that I wanted to talk about in these 2 chapters is the author's use of figurative language. So we talked in class this year about different types of figurative language that authors can use, and I asked you to even use your own in your writing. There are a couple examples in these chapters. One that I wanted to highlight is where he refers to Peggy's voice as a chainsaw. He says her voice is as pleasant as a chainsaw. He could feel it cutting into him. So it wasn't literally a chainsaw and it wasn't actually cutting him, but it's figurative in that it was so painful to him. Another example that I want to give you a chance to explain is his phrase, "My hands are tied." He says, "Okay, Peggy, I hear you." He broke the rubber band around his thumbs, "But my hands are tied. There's no way I can make any changes in that 6th grade team, especially not now at the end of the year." I want you to explain what he means when he says his hands are tied. If you can, try to decide what type of figurative language that phrase is and what does it mean in this context. My hands are tied. They're not literally tied, it's figurative. Looking forward to seeing your answers.